Hello everyone, Dr. Weiner here. I wanted to record a video for International Overdose Awareness Day, which happened this week, about opioids, about overdoses, and specifically, how do you know if it's becoming a problem? I know there's a lot of people out there, particularly those who are taking medications, who might be thinking, I've heard a lot about this. I know that overdoses are surging, but do I have a problem? And so I wanted to take just a few minutes today to talk about an overview of what's going on with overdoses, briefly how we got to this point, and then just a couple quick rules to think about in terms of deciding for yourself, is it time for a change? Do I think that I'm getting to a bad place with opioids? So first, let's talk about what's going on right now. So we've had a huge spike in overdose deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic. So already you can see from 99 till the present, there's been this massive increase. However, in the last year during coronavirus, it went up by 30%, and we haven't seen anything like this in a one-year jump in this entire time, but it amounts to over 92,000 overdose deaths. It is a tremendous problem. Now, the character of these deaths, particularly opioid overdose deaths, which are about 70% of the people who are dying from drug overdoses, has changed over time. In the beginning, opioid overdoses were due to prescription drugs by and large, due to prescription pills. Then wave 2 was characterized by a rise in heroin overdose deaths. And you can see that in the orange line there in the middle. And then the third wave, which is what we're in right now, has been driven predominantly by fentanyl. And that fentanyl is either what people are using or it's contaminating other substances. Fentanyl is an opioid that's up to 1,000 times stronger than heroin. So it only takes a very small amount to be lethal, which you can see in this picture right here. There's heroin on the left, a fatal dose for someone who's opioid naive. And then on the right, the same amount of fentanyl that would be fatal for someone who's opioid naive. And so you can clearly see how this can get out of hand and be lethal incredibly quickly. So when thinking about how does this apply to me, or if there's a loved one you know in your life who's taking opioids, I think it's first important to talk about what is an addiction. Is this actually getting out of hand, or is this something that is a normal response to taking this kind of medication? First, let's define some terms. You've got physiological dependence or physical dependence. This is when your body starts to adapt to having a medication inside of it. It's something actually that will happen to everyone who takes an addictive medication. Your body starts to say, wait a second, I've got too much of a chemical in here, in this case of opioids, so I'm going to produce less of it endogenously, naturally, to compensate for the amount that's being put into the body. The problem, though, is that this creates this cycle of developing tolerance and then needing to take more, and developing tolerance and needing to take more. And then when you stop, you go into a state of withdrawal. And that really is the hallmark of an addictive substance and an addictive cycle, where you build up that tolerance, and then when you take it away, it takes some time for the body to get back, and the brain to get back to a normal place. However, for some substances, that withdrawal, that period can be lethal. Opioids are actually not one of them. For opioids, it's the overdose, the part where you have too much in your system, that creates the lethality. Opioid withdrawal feels incredibly uncomfortable, and I guess technically you might be able to dehydrate yourself, but unlike with an overdose, which slows and then stops your respiration, opioid withdrawal is not fatal. When you just have physiological dependence, control is likely present, however. So it's something where even though you would go through withdrawal, if you really wanted to stop, you could. It might take some assistance, it might take some time for your body to go through those cycles, but it's possible. An example of someone who might have physiological dependence is someone who's taking opioids for chronic pain, using as prescribed. Maybe they're on a pretty high dose, they couldn't just stop when they wanted to, but they're not in the sort of situation where they couldn't stop. They can, it might just be uncomfortable. So the second facet that feeds into addiction, and opioids aren't indicated for chronic pain most of the time. That's an important part to keep in mind as well. Sometimes that is the best option, but that's been a huge push for these waves in the opioid epidemic, is saying, hey, let's only prescribe these when it's absolutely necessary. The second is called psychological dependence, which means that you feel like you need it even though your body isn't physically asking for it. And so oftentimes this comes from the feeling like you need the substance in order to cope with your life in some way. An example of someone who has psychological dependence on a substance would be if someone is self-medicating for emotional problems or taking pills either before or after stressful events in anticipation of the fact that they're going to have those emotions and they want to dull them or to numb them out. Then a substance use disorder or an addiction is when you've got a combination of physiological dependence and psychological dependence, and you usually also have escalating use, so you're using more and more and more, and then also consequences that come along with that, either physical consequences or consequences at work, consequences with your family, health-related consequences. But even though these bad things are happening, you choose to keep using the substance anyway. That is one of the hallmarks of an addiction. So examples of this is if someone was buying street drugs, opioids off the street, taking pills from others, or just clearly excessively using a substance, opioids or otherwise. So is it a problem? That's the next question. So if you're thinking about yourself, you're thinking about a loved one, the question is, at what point do you need to take action to try to fix this or to try to get better? I like to have people look for four key themes to determine if something is a problem. The first is the purpose. Why are you using that substance? If you're using any medicine for its intended purpose, then okay, you might have physiological dependence, but it's probably not escalated to this point where it feels out of control, like it's driving your behavior. The purpose to watch out for is, are you using this substance to cope with feelings? If you're using a substance to cope with feelings, that's a sign that it's coloring outside the lines of what it's intended for, and that's how, generally speaking, substance use grows out of control. Second, the quantity and type of what's being used. Sometimes someone is just using clearly an excessive amount of a substance to the point where that might be problematic. Like, for example, if someone was consuming, like, say, a fifth of vodka a day, that's 17 drinks. That's clearly a lot. There's, that biologically that's going to harm the liver. Or if someone's taking a tremendous amount of opioids, many morphine equivalent doses, certainly over 50, over 80, over 100, that's a lot of pills. And in terms of what a morphine equivalent dose is, different opioids have different strengths. So if you Google that, you can find a calculator to find out what your morphine equivalent dose is. The ideal, unless you're definitely under very close supervision from a pain medicine specialist, would be under 20 per day, is the recommendation from the CDC for it to be as safe as possible. So if you're not aware of what your dose is, that could be something just to look up to know and maybe ask your doctor about. But when I say type, that also means if you are, say, buying heroin off the street, it probably is a problem. Or if you're using fentanyl off the street, if you're supplementing what you've been prescribed, or because you're in this addictive cycle, you need to go do something illegal essentially to feel like you need to survive. That's probably a system that bears some amount of intervention, where you'd be a little better off if you changed it. The third is control. Do you have control over your substance use? Could you stop if you wanted to, not because you think that you can, but because you've done it for a long time and it hasn't felt the whole time like you're just holding on for dear life, or like you can't wait until the time is done so that you can get back to doing it. But if it truly is something that is take it or leave it, you have control over your use. With opioids, particularly if they're prescribed, the thing to watch out for, again, is escalating doses. So taking more than you're prescribed, running out early refills, getting, again, this higher and higher prescription. That's something to watch for. And the fourth are those consequences. Again, is your family worried? Are you struggling at work? Are you struggling with wakefulness? Are you doing illegal things, and have you been caught now because you're trying to support the fact that you've got this physiological dependency? If you're having consequences and you keep doing something anyway, that's oftentimes an indicator that that is a problematic pattern, that is a problematic system. And so when someone is having an addiction to opioids or an opioid use disorder, usually they're checking at least one of these boxes, if not all four or at least three. There's no hard and fast rule for whether or not something is a problem. Everyone has to decide that for themselves. We do have diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5, if we're being overly technical about it, but functionally, the most important thing is that you understand that you have a problem if you do, and this, in my opinion, is the easiest way to think about it to make that the differentiation. So say you're looking at this and you're thinking, I do have a problem, or someone in my family has a problem. The big question is, what now? Because there's a lot of pressure to move. There's a lot of questions that the healthcare industry, and particularly the addiction and recovery industry, is a quagmire. If you don't know what you're doing, it's really hard to know how to handle it. So here would be my first recommendations. First, there is a 24/7 hotline for this exact issue. It's 800-662-HELP. 4357. If you don't know what to do, call that number. This is a federal hotline, and they will help you figure out your next step. There's really a tremendous amount of resources being invested in this, and more is coming along seemingly every month. We hear about news sources, be it from lawsuits to hold folks responsible who created this epidemic, or investment from federal or state governments. So there's a lot of resources that are being generated all the time, but if you really don't know what to do, call that number. Second, talk to your doctor. Your actual physician. This is someone who is actually, they are on your side, and if you talk to them about what's going on, they will help you get connected to some of the numerous treatments that are available. We have medication-assisted therapies. There are plenty of programs, addiction treatment programs, all throughout the country that you can work with locally to you, or if you needed a residential program, you could go there. So many options are out there that have really good evidence behind them. So getting hooked into that, either by calling the hotline, talking to your doctor or a therapist, a really important next step. But most importantly, don't keep it a secret, because that's how it grows. When you think you might be having a problem, but you just ignore it and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, you're going to develop that tolerance, increase use, and keep progressing along the way where you might eventually have an overdose. Because ultimately that is the most important thing to recognize about this overdose epidemic, is that it generally takes people years to move from the point where their use has become problematic to the point where they're at risk of overdose, to the point that they overdose and die. There's years of time, but during those years, oftentimes people feel ashamed, or they keep it a secret, they don't talk about it. Make sure to talk about it. It truly is okay. Particularly healthcare providers, we are here to help. I'll also just throw myself out there as an option. If anyone who's watching this video doesn't know where to turn, doesn't know what to do, please drop me an email. You can find that on my website at weinerphd.com. I'll be happy to help try to navigate you to someone in your area, or hook you up with some directories to help. But again, that hotline, very good resource as well. So thanks to everyone who took the time to make it to this point in the video. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your interest. I hope this has been helpful to you. We truly can turn the tide in this epidemic of overdoses if we approach it in the right way. And in my opinion, the number one way to do this is knowledge, so that people know what's going on with themselves and with their loved ones. And then also communication and transparency. Don't hide it. Don't keep it a secret. Reach out for help, and someone will reach back to you. So take care, everyone, and until next time.